"It has been nearly 10 minutes. It seems that he hasn't seen anything," said Celine in relief. "It's a pity that he has really good luck," Alethea responded, much less excitedly. Celine complained, "I don't want to depend on chance. Please, choose a safer method next time." "Let's not talk about what has already happened. Let's guess how long the king can stay in there. Isn't the longest record for a common person less than 15 minutes, even taking into account those who tried in the Land of Dawn?" said Alethea, changing the topic. "Witches do not fare any better. How long you can stay in the Divine Land has nothing to do with your magic power. Even in the Union, the relic was constantly monitored by a group of common people in turns. However, considering the king's age and experience, he should come out soon." According to all the records that Celine had read through, the warriors who had been to the battlefield and fought the demons generally persisted longer, whether they were a witch or a common person. The highest record was held by Lady Alice, who stayed there for almost 2 hours. As a king who'd never been to the battlefield, Ethan had to be very skilled to last so long. Maybe he'll want to stay longer. After all, it's his first time witnessing such a marvelous scene. Then he'll feel dizzy and even fall unconscious. Celine suddenly realized something and looked at Paisley. "Did you forget to tell him that?" "A coma isn't too bad, and won't cause him any real damage." Paisley shook her tentacles and said, "On the contrary, when he runs out of energy, this kind of unpleasant thing can reduce his interest in getting in contact with the relic again. It's better for everyone this way." "So, you didn't forget to tell him?" Paisley did not directly answer. "Sometimes it's better to not explain. None of us would like to have so many restraints when we explore the Divine Land." "I now understand why Lady Natalia chose you as one of the candidates for the 3 chiefs," said Alethea, smacking her lips. Celine agreed with Alethea. Compared to the disgrace of being scared, a coma caused by energy exhaustion could be regarded as a result without side effects. It could reduce the curiosity of the common people without destroying their relationship with them. Paisley obviously had more foresight than them. After a while, she began to frown slightly and asked, "It's been more than a quarter of an hour. Is he okay?" "It seems nothing is wrong. This king seems to be full of surprises," Paisley replied after glancing at the sitting Ethan Winthrop. "It's a new record for common people. Should I say congratulations?" said Alethea, shrugging her main tentacle. Celine gave no response. She felt a little uneasy, like something was wrong. As they continued to wait, she became even more nervous. Another 15 minutes later, Ethan still remained motionless, and Celine was becoming more and more anxious. Having lived for over 100 years, she should have felt disconnected from time. However, her pulse reminded her that she was, in a sense, still alive. 45 minutes in the Divine Land was too long for someone who was not a warrior or an extraordinary. He should have run out of energy by now. Celine wondered if there was some unobserved accident in the Divine Land. Wendy could not help but step forward to try to wake up the king, but Paisley immediately stopped her. "If you get too close to the relic, you'll be affected by it too." "Then let me enter the Divine Land and bring His Majesty back," Wendy insisted. Celine noticed that the other witch who had been hidden had begun to move. From the vague magic reaction, Celine knew that she had taken something out of her pocket. Based on the information that Phyllis had collected, it was a unique weapon from Neverwinter. She passed her concerns along to the other two, and then Paisley nodded and took immediate action. She stretched out her tentacles to wrap herself around the king, and she pulled him back to Wendy. Though it was not the ideal way to end the exploration, his safety was their top priority. If both sides conflicted with each other, the consequences would be disastrous. As the relic was placed back into the God's Stone of Retaliation box, Ethan suddenly opened his eyes. "Your Majesty, are you okay?" Wendy asked eagerly, helping him stand up. "There's nothing wrong. I'm fine," he answered, rubbing his sore legs. "I met alien monsters who were guarding the other two relics and talked to them. Unfortunately, they did not understand what I was saying." Celine was shocked. "Wait, what are you talking about? Did you meet the demon and a huge eyeball? It seemed to stay in a boat that could move underwater, but I'm not sure if it's a boat or something else," Ethan answered. Even though she could not see her companion's expressions, she could feel their shock through their shared connection, especially Alethea's. Among all the survivors, she had stayed in the Divine Land for the longest time. Her experience in the Blessed Army had enabled her to persist for about an hour, but that was only because nothing had appeared in the paintings. If she had met the demon or an unknown enemy, the speed of her energy consumption would have doubled. "What happened, then?" Paisley continued to ask. "I'm not really sure. Anyway, some black tentacles suddenly popped up in the paintings and attacked them. Those tentacles were so powerful that the monsters had to retreat from the paintings. It happened in only a few minutes." Did he mean that he had met the guardians of the other two civilizations at the same time and defeated them without being injured at all? Celine felt as though she were listening to a fairy tale. She was not surprised to hear about the black tentacles. As his energy declined, the relic undoubtedly had a greater impact on him. He might have heard imaginary sounds or seen imaginary things, such as tentacles. They were not merely mental disturbances, but they could do real harm to the body. That was why Paisley emphasized that they were more than illusions. If they interrupted the summoning before any real harm was caused, the user would not have a serious problem. Of course, it was impossible for ordinary people to defend themselves against this sort of spiritual erosion. Even a witch who had experienced thousands of battles would quickly feel tired and eventually lose control of her body. But what Ethan faced was a completely reversed situation, and the black tentacles had rushed towards the enemy. She had never heard of such a thing happening in the Divine Land. Looking at the king, who seemed to not care about what had happened, Celine suddenly had an incredible thought. Was this ordinary person comparable to Lady Alice, the Queen of Starfall City, and the head of the Three Chairs? Did he possess her strong mental power? However, if he did not seem to be aware of it. After stretching his arms and legs, he laughed and said, "Anyway, thank you for pulling me out. I intended to see if there was any border to the Divine Land, but it was too large and I did not want to walk all the way back." The three witches remained speechless for a long while. Then Paisley finally broke the silence. "That's all right. Do you still want to continue exploring the relic?" Ethan shook his head and said, "Not right now. There are just 4 paintings, and it won't make much difference having another look at them. Take me to the central carrier." Ever since his previous meeting with the Aquila witches, Ethan had looked forward to meeting the central carrier. To decipher the literature that the underground civilization had left behind, many Aquila survivors had sacrificed themselves by merging their souls, but in that form they could only answer yes or no to any questions. Otherwise, they were essentially useless. Thinking of this solemn story, Ethan felt that an air of mystery shrouded this central carrier. When Ethan finally saw it, he gasped in shock. It was chained up in a secret chamber under the hall. This orb, much bigger than any of the other original carriers, such as the one occupied by Paisley, was heavily chained. Its thickest tentacles were forced apart and nailed to the walls or the ceiling. From its badly scarred skin and its broken tentacles, He could tell that it was not the first time she had been treated this way. He remembered that it was able to feel things just like the original carriers. It was able to feel the heat and cold, taste the sweet and bitter, and feel pain. He could not help but knit his eyebrows, asking, "Why? I remember that the volunteers who integrated with the central carrier were all witches, including one of your 3 chiefs, Lady Eleanor, Your Majesty." Paisley sighed. "We had no choice. Carriers are as powerful as God's punishment warriors. Their tentacles can drill into the earth and build a light well in the dome. They can also attack enemies and tear their prey in half. If we don't keep her here, she'll subconsciously move around and cause us lots of trouble. If that happens, she'll be even harder to deal with than those hybrid demonic beasts." Ethan quickly understood Paisley's feelings of powerlessness. He guessed that this orb might be a combat unit that the underground civilization had created, but if it lost its mind and got out of control, it would be a serious threat to the relic of the deities and the magic core. He believed that the Aquila survivors did not want to take this risk, and as a result they had no choice but to keep it trapped here. However, knowing the reason did not make him feel any better. He felt sad for the witches who had willingly sacrificed everything for Aquila, only to end up imprisoned in this dark corner. Seeing Ethan deep in thought, Paisley said, with a mixed expression of gratitude and sadness, "We tried to ask about their feelings, but we were unable to get a response. The souls that merged with the central carrier cannot be separated again by the magic core, so we have no idea whether they're able to feel what's going on." Alethea, who had remained quiet, suddenly spoke again, saying, "All the Aquila witches, including us, have promised that we will follow Lady Eleanor forever. You don't have to feel too bad for them. They knew what they were doing." Ethan somehow felt that her voice wasn't as cold as before. Well, if it had been as cold as dry ice before, it was now only as cool as iced water. Celine added, "When we asked the central carrier whether we should chain her, all her 3 main tentacles answered yes. If she hadn't agreed to this, we would not have tied her up so tightly." Ethan nodded and said, "Maybe the Witch Union can help you with this problem. Soraya can produce flexible fabrics to replace the iron chains, and a little girl named Feather can stick things together. If they work together, they may find some way to constrain her without hurting her. If you don't mind." Paisley slightly lowered the main tentacle on her head and said, "That will be great. You have my gratitude." "Don't worry about it," Ethan replied. Then he asked, "What did you mean by all her 3 main tentacles answered yes? She can say yes with one main tentacle and no with another at the same time? When that happens, how can you be sure of what she's trying to say?" "Let Celine explain that to you." Hearing that there may be a way to alleviate the pain of the witches in the central carrier, Celine seemed quite excited and answered, "The central carrier is different from us. It has 3 main tentacles, which enable her to express more complicated information without communicating through telepathy, which is what I'm doing right now." With these words, Celine's main tentacle on her head emitted a beam of dim red light. "Oh, it can even shine?" "Yes. Before we learned how to communicate with our thoughts, we often used this method to express our feelings and emotions. But now we don't use it as much anymore." She moved to the center of the secret chamber, pointing at the 3 main tentacles which were hanging from the central carrier's head and were nailed to the ground. "Without consciousness, she can't express her feelings. She's only able to reply yes or no through the red light. If a main tentacle shines, it means yes. If it doesn't, it means no." She continued to explain. However, when we were deciphering the literature of the underground civilization, we realized that a simple yes or no couldn't quickly help us find the correct answers. For example, if we mistake the sentence, "I'm an Aquila witch" for "I'm a witch" or "I'm Aquila," she'll answer no. With this method, we would have to spend a lot of time confirming each simple sentence. Ethan immediately understood what she meant. So you counted her shining mane tentacles to see how close you got to the right answer. Celine said, "You really are smart. That's right. When we are closer to the right answer, she will emit more red lights. When all three of her main tentacles shine, this means that the answer was either 100% correct, or she couldn't agree more." Ethan felt touched yet again by these witches. So, that was how the witches had learned that they should be constrained underground. Even though it was unclear whether these souls had made this decision for the sake of the other witches' safety, or based on their own feelings, this choice was still quite moving. He took a deep breath, asking, "May I ask her some questions?" Celine moved to the side and answered, "Yes, of course. You can just ask her directly." Ethan approached the central carrier and asked slowly, "Suppose now I have 2 baskets. Each basket has 2 apples inside. After I dump out all the baskets, there are 4 apples on the ground. Is that right?" All 3 tentacles shone at once. Celine was startled. Is that what you wanted to ask?" Wendy also felt a little embarrassed at this moment, asking, "Your Majesty, what are you up to now?" "It's just a test." Ethan remained calm and continued to ask the second question. "Now, suppose that I've got 12,345 baskets, and each basket has 54,321 apples. If I dump out all the baskets, how many apples are there on the ground?" He took out a paper strip and continued, "I guess that there are this many apples. Am I right?" He read out the correct answer he had prepared in advance, which was a 9-digit number. The calculations he had done to get this answer were quite complex. He believed that people who had never gone through Neverwinter's mathematics educational courses could never get the right answer in such a short amount of time. This could be seen from the shared silence among the Aquila senior witches. However, all the 3 main tentacles of the central carrier shone red without delay after hearing what he said, just as they had done to the first question. Amazed by the result, Ethan was lost in his thoughts. This central carrier could figure out a 9-digit multiplication. No matter what method she had used, whether she had used summation or column multiplication, she had managed to find the correct answer instantly. This meant that her calculating skills far surpassed those of the common people. Even if she was only able to answer yes or no, she would still be of great assistance to the Arithmetic Academy. At the very least, she could check their calculation results, which could help minimize the mistakes they made in large and complex calculation projects. He squatted down excitedly, and with a childlike grin he patted the main tentacle of the central carrier. "You're brilliant." The red light went out. Paisley reminded him, "Your Majesty, she can't communicate with you directly." "She can understand my words and even give me yes or no answers. This already counts as a kind of communication." Ethan believed that communication, in essence, was just the reception and transmission of information. The central carrier could at worst be described as having troubles expressing her thoughts, and thus she couldn't communicate as well as a normal person could. He was not discouraged by this in the slightest, and intended to find out whether the central carrier was really limited to just giving out yes or no responses. After pondering for a while, he said, "Now let's suppose lighting 1 main tentacle means 1, and lighting 2 tentacles means 2. Can you give me a 3 with your red light?" The question seemed to be much simpler than the 5-digit multiplication, but it served an entirely different purpose. If the central carrier could display a correct answer to this question, this would mean that she was able to give more elaborate feedback to his questions. Moreover, she might be able to display calculation results directly in some way. However, the central carrier did not instantly answer like before. After a few seconds, one of her tentacles started to glow, another one only dimmed, and the last one remained dark. According to Celine, this meant that what Ethan said was 30% correct. However, this signal did not last for long. The light of the glimmering tentacle went out very quickly, and was soon followed by the glowing one. So the answer is a no? This is, Celine slightly sighed and explained, "This is beyond her capacity. She had to express her agreement in a more complicated way and thus got confused." She paused before continuing. "We've tried to ask her to express simple ideas and even some short sentences. However, once she found out that she could not answer a question simply with a yes or no, she would respond much more slowly and also easily get confused, like how she just did." Ethan said, frowning, "Does this mean I have caused some sort of a logical barrier in her brain? Is she all right?" Celine waved her tentacles, answering, "She'll be all right after a moment of rest. I once tried asking her some contradictory questions. As a result, she ignored the rest of our questions for several weeks." Now Ethan was certain that this biocomputer was going to be difficult to handle, but he still did not want to give up on his plan of creating a new communication system to help the central carrier express more complicated ideas by answering yes or no. As she could check their calculation results, he thought that she must have known the correct answer and just did not know how to display it with her tentacles. However, formulating this system was well beyond his area of expertise. As engineers and programmers tended to not get along very well, he knew very little about computer programming. After a bit of thought, he decided to give up on the idea of studying this central carrier all by himself. "By the way, I remember that you said the carriers needed mud and heat to continue functioning. Is there any magma here?" Paisley replied, "Fran hasn't drilled that deep yet, but we've found a boiling underground river here, so we should be able to find lava nearby soon. Also, I often smell sulfur from this underground river. It's good for us to take a bath in it, too. As for the central carrier, we pump water from the river to shower her every few days, so you don't need to worry about this." Hearing that magma was not necessary for the carrier to function, and that hot water could be used as a replacement, Ethan was excited. He would only need a boiler to heat some water for this central carrier if he wanted to move her to the Arithmetic Academy one day. He knew it was still not the time to make this request, as it would feel like he was overstepping his boundaries with the Aquila witches, who had just moved here and had not yet joined the United Front with Neverwinter. Besides, he was worried that those astrologers from the Academy wouldn't be able to keep their composure once they saw this gigantic orb monster. He would first have to build trust with the witches during the exploration of the Snowy Mountains before he could make this sensitive request. After Ethan left the secret chamber and ended his tour of the third border city, he began to contemplate his plans for this place. At present, only a rough frame of this underground city had been constructed, and it could only serve as a temporary underground residence for the witches. Only after tunnels connected the numerous peaks of the impassable mountain range could they consider this a real hidden stronghold. With the artillery installments and military fortifications above ground, it would then be incorporated into Neverwinter's outermost defensive line. As soon as he returned to the castle, he summoned all the City Hall department leaders to his reception hall. A purple curtain of light slowly materialized in front of them, before eventually enveloping the whole room. Despite the fact that Ethan had informed them in advance about what they were going to see, the officials' faces still drastically changed when they saw this incredible scene. The young Minister of Agriculture, Sirius Daly, even accidentally knocked over his teacup on the table in shock. Silas kept on wiping the sweat from his forehead. Kyle Seachy and Dispersion Star stared at the light curtain in fearful disbelief. If it had not been for the king, who was still sitting calmly in his chair, they probably would have already run away with their tails between their legs. Ethan glanced around and found that the only person who remained relatively calm was the noble lady from the northern region, Edith Kent, who only jumped a little. At the same time, however, her eyes seemed to be filled with excitement and curiosity. He also noticed that she was now looking at him with more respect in her eyes. He had to admit that trying to figure out women was quite the difficult task. He had expected everyone to act this way, but Edith had surprised him. As he was determined to form a united front with the Aquila survivors to fight against the demons, he knew that he could not hide them from the officials forever. Given this, he thought he had better introduce the witches to the officials before anyone in City Hall noticed something strange in the mountains to the north of Neverwinter. He also believed that 2 years of working in City Hall should have broadened their outlooks and made them more open-minded toward new things. However, after he explained to them who these tentacle orbs were, why they came here, and how he planned to explore the snowy mountains with them, most of the officials did not seem to be very supportive at all. If they had not been familiar with the witches in the Witch Union, they would have already treated these ancient witches as alien creatures, just like the demons. Silas, the City Hall director, said that it was too late to come up with new budget plans for this expedition, since it was already time for the finance department to work on the final annual accounts. He also expressed his worries about the border area's possible vulnerability if they were to dispatch additional troops for this expedition, given how a force had recently been sent to the southernmost region. With an obvious distrust for the Aquila survivors, Chief Knight Carter doubted the safety of this joint action, and even argued that dangers might arise due to internal conflicts in the expedition team. Sirius, the Minister of Agriculture, muttered about how the grains they had in stock could hardly support this plan alongside the ongoing military expedition, and this news about the shortage of food might cause a panic among Neverwinter's residents. Carl, the Minister of Construction, expressed his concerns about the instability of the mining area above the place that the ancient witches had hollowed out in the mountain range. As they all gave various reasons for canceling this expedition, Ethan was clear that all they were doing was persuading him to think twice before cooperating with those tentacle monsters. The discussion had become bogged down over this contentious issue. If this had happened in a place such as a democratic parliament, he would not have been able to carry out his plan. However, he did not forget that he was the Lord of Neverwinter, the King of Grey Castle, and the one who had the final say in this matter. He knew that it was now time for him to take over the meeting and forcibly carry out the plan, just like he did when he had decided to protect the witches in his domain. Ethan knocked on the table, and everybody in the hall instantly quieted down. He rose from his chair and walked over so he could stand behind the officials. When the months of demons end, we'll welcome the new year as the most important year for Grey Castle. I'll unify the entire kingdom and hold the coronation ceremony to officially become the king, and you'll all become my ministers to help me govern this country. 2 years ago, everyone would have considered Ethan's promises to be the mad ravings of an arrogant prince. 1 year ago, they would have thought that his plans were long-term goals. However, today no one doubted what he said. All the officials rose and placed their right hands on their chests almost simultaneously. They lowered their heads and said, "Your Majesty, it's our honor." Suddenly all their complaints and doubts disappeared. They looked excited as they understood the power of Neverwinter after working for 2 years in City Hall. They knew for sure that once His Majesty made up his mind to unify the whole kingdom, he would definitely bring all the regions and areas of the kingdom under his control. When that happened, they would go from being the officials of a city to the most powerful ministers of a kingdom. Ethan made a gesture indicating for them to sit down, and he said, "It's more than that. My Grey Castle will become unprecedentedly large. My kingdom will include the Hermes Plateau in the north. It will reach the Endless Cape in the south. It will expand westward to the Barbarian Land, and it will expand eastward to the Fjord Islands." He further explained, "To make that happen, the First Army will become the busiest department, and thus we will leave fewer soldiers to guard Neverwinter. Given this, I have to explore the snowy mountains now to eliminate hidden threats to the city. I don't want my king's city to be attacked by some unknown enemies from the mountains when the main force of the First Army isn't here." Carter suggested to the king in a low voice, "Your Majesty, maybe the First Army and the Witch Union will be enough to explore the snowy mountains." Ethan interrupted, "No, in a dark underground cave where the landscape is extremely complex, guns and cannons have only a limited effect. We don't have any maps of the cave or any preset firing positions there. If they happen to meet some demonic hybrids, how much do you think it will cost the First Army to defeat them?" The Chief Knight was silent at once. Ethan went on, "This is why we must work together with the Aquila survivors. Their God's Punishment witches and the Witch Union have complementary advantages. The First Army will set sentry posts along the way and cover their retreat if need be. This is the most prudent arrangement." Ethan paused, then suddenly raised his voice. "You all listen to me carefully. Don't tell me it's difficult to implement this plan. You're sitting here to solve problems for me. If you can't, my City Hall doesn't need you anymore." He paused and looked at the City Hall director. "Silas?" Silas shuddered, answering, "Yes, Your Majesty." "Is there any problem with the final accounts and logistics for the expedition?" "No, I don't believe so." The old man wiped the sweat from his face. "I'll give you a plan in 5 days." 3 days, Ethan corrected him with an air of authority. After that, he turned to look at the Minister of Agriculture. "Sirius?" "Yes, Your Majesty?" said Sirius. "If the border area's food stocks are low, you can get some from the Longsong area. We've got enough concrete boats for this. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Karl van Bart?" The Minister of Construction answered immediately. "Your Majesty, I'll carefully check the geological condition of both the mining and furnace areas." "Good." Ethan smiled. "Then we are all in agreement." This time all the problems could be readily solved, since all the officials saw the king's determination and accepted his tasks without any hesitation. After assigning the tasks to the officials, it was time for Ethan to decide who would embark on this expedition. Paisley's voice resounded in everyone's head again. Most of the officials were scared again, but as soon as they saw Ethan calmly talking to the tentacle monster, they calmed down a little and did not flee the hall in a panic. Since they had already promised His Majesty that they would work with the Aquila witches, they thought that all they needed to do at the moment was force themselves to remain seated and listen to the voice. To avoid seeing the tentacle monster, they all closed their eyes and lowered their heads, pretending that they were engrossed in their thoughts. They acted as if the sound was some evil spell from hell instead of a female voice. Seeing them, Ethan did not know whether to laugh or cry. Edith was the only official who dared to look at the light curtain. Sometimes she even tried to talk with the senior witches of Aquila, just like Ethan did. Not wanting to be upstaged by his opponent, Silas managed to lift up his head several times, but failed to say anything in the end. Ethan had expected this and had planned to not involve his City Hall officials in the conversation. At last, the Aquila witches agreed to send 50 God's Punishment witches to team up with the Witch Union, and these witches were the main force for the expedition. The First Army would send a group of 500 soldiers, with Brian as their commander, to join this expedition as well. The remaining troops in the city would be temporarily handed over to Carter, and they would continue to fight against the demonic beasts at the border. When both parties agreed to these arrangements, and Ethan was about to end this meeting, Edith suddenly raised her hand. "Your Majesty, I wish to apply to join the expedition team and go to the western region's snowy mountains together with the First Army soldiers." Silas's mouth twisted, and he said, "Come on, you're not a witch or a soldier. Don't mess up His Majesty's plan." Edith insisted. "I used to serve as a fencing coach in a night battalion and defeated each of my opponents, including demonic beasts, within 5 rounds. I can protect myself." Ethan asked curiously, "What's the reason for this request?" Edith explained, "The Battle of Divine Will is getting closer to us, but none of the officials sitting here know what the demons or the underground creatures look like. As we know nothing about our opponents in the upcoming war, I'm afraid that City Hall won't be able to reach Your Majesty's expectations. I know that someone may think that since the First Army will fight against the demons, his own department won't get involved in war-related stuff. However, once the battle begins, all the departments, such as the Ministry of Construction and the Ministry of Agriculture, will have to satisfy the needs of the war effort. This is inevitable, and so to do a great job in City Hall, we also have to know our enemies." "You..." The City Hall director wanted to retort, but did not know what to say at this moment. Ethan could not help but smile. What she said might sound a little belligerent, but it was also quite interesting. He also derived inspiration from her statement, and thought it might be a good idea to only promote those officials who had worked in cities located on or near the front lines. In this way, he could guarantee that the officials in City Hall would never underestimate the importance of this fatal war, or make some unrealistic government decrees during wartime. Besides, he believed that it would be reasonable to let Edith join the First Army's expedition, as she indeed had battle experience. He nodded to the Pearl of the Northern Region. "Well, please go get ready for the expedition." "Yes, Your Majesty." Edith smoothed her hair, which was hanging in front of her ears, and bowed with a smile. "Sister, are you going somewhere far away?" Cole Kant's voice could be heard from behind Edith. She continued sorting out her clothes without turning her head back to her brother. "Not very far away. I'll just hang around somewhere in the western region." He came to her side and asked again, "How long will it take?" "I don't know." Cole started to look at the clothes piled up on his sister's bed. "You didn't pick any formal dresses, girdle, or corsets? Aren't you going to visit some nobles or attend banquets?" Edith gave him a quick glance. "You are certainly more observant than you used to be, but you don't always have to tell others everything you notice." The boy winced at once and said, "You were the one who taught me how to improve my observation abilities. Now I'll teach you another thing. When you're talking to a woman, remember to remain graceful all the time, and choose your words carefully. Understand?" "But you're my sister." "If I wasn't, you would suffer a lot." Cole shuddered and said, I see." "Good." Edith shrugged. "How do you feel working in City Hall?" "It's all right. Just like you instructed, I never revealed that I was a noble. All I do there is just write and record, which are easy for me, but I really don't understand." He hesitated. "Why didn't you put me in your department?" Since Cole Kant had watched the artillery drill, he had given up on the idea of returning to Evernight. He and Edith had also moved from the Foreign Affairs building to a spacious house near the Lord's castle. Now they were official residents of Neverwinter. As a noble who had received a traditional education, Cole had found a job easily in City Hall. Alongside the 100 or so scholars and servants from the northern region, Edith had managed to gain a certain status there. These people would not stay here forever, but she knew that His Majesty would never reject more people from the northern region coming to learn the new system. The young king was thirsty for talent, and now the northern region was the only one that was willingly providing him with talented people. As long as her father kept on sending new people here, she would always keep her status and position in this new government. Edith smiled and answered, "Because it's not necessary, and it may cause us trouble. The City Hall director always keeps an eye on me. If I put you in my department and he managed to find out your mistakes, I'd be faced with a dilemma. If we ruin the Cant family's reputation, it'll change His Majesty's opinion of me, for the worse." She paused for a moment, then continued, "Even if we don't get along with each other, the others will still think of us as a whole, as we share a common surname. So, no matter what you do in the future, you've got to remember you represent the whole family, not just yourself." The boy looked down with a contemplative expression on his face. Ethan did not know how much he could understand, but she had said all there was to be said about this matter. Even when the feudal aristocratic order was completely replaced by Ethan's new system, their family reputation would still have a long-term influence on them, and might even draw more attention to them. Their common surname had replaced their noble identities, and it had become the most important thing for them now, just like the way the moon became the brightest thing in the sky after the sunset. After quite a long while, he nodded and said, "I'll be careful." Their father had said that Cole was timid, irresolute, and weak, therefore he was not a suitable heir for the Cant family. Calvin was worried that his son would not be strong enough to lead his knights to guard their domain, and if they were in the middle of a war, Cole would be even more useless. Edith knew that Cole Cant took after his father in terms of his personality. If Timothy had never planned to ally with some of the less powerful nobles in the northern region to break the existing order there, the Cant family would not have been able to get where they were today. Now that they were no longer a lesser noble family in some remote place in the northern region, their father thought that Edith was the better successor, and thus he had great expectations for her. However, Edith was clear that Cole's shortcomings were not going to hold him back in Neverwinter. On the contrary, being prudent, introverted, and adaptable meant that he would thrive in City Hall. The moment she had learned that a group of common people with snow powder weapons had captured Timothy's city in merely one day, she had realized that personal strength and courage were not as important as they had been before. This was also why she had insisted on keeping her brother in Neverwinter, to learn new things. Cole casually picked up a long dress and lifted it in front of him, acting as if he were checking whether it fitted him or not. He asked, "Oh, sister, where are you going indeed? I don't want to stay in such a large house alone. I'll get bored." "But it was you who asked me to buy a big house. It's 500 gold royals, which is quite expensive even for me. Now you think it's too big?" Edith asked him in a cold voice. The boy was startled and almost dropped the dress on the ground. No, I'm very satisfied with this house. Wait until next summer. Our little brother will come here to keep you company." She glanced at him and found that the dress seemed to suit him well. "As for where I'm going, it's a secret, but it's not something I can't tell you. According to the old rules, you have to pay a price for this information." Cole hesitated, as he was familiar with this little game and had been tricked into doing many silly things this way. However, in the end, his uncontrollable curiosity took over his fear. He said to Edith, "I want to know." She smiled and said, "I'm going to the Snowy Mountains with some soldiers from the First Army. He was surprised and asked, "You mean the source of the Redwater River? Is there anything special there?" "Some unknown demonic hybrid monsters or alien species. We'll probably meet something strange up there," Edith said. She then continued to describe the Aquila witches she had seen during the meeting. "Now, we've entered into an alliance with those tentacle monsters. I can't wait to witness our monster allies fighting against our monster enemies." Cole listened with his mouth agape, then stuttered, Wait, aren't you afraid of those things? And His Majesty made a deal with some monsters? Even the demons don't look that scary, do they?" "So?" She threw up her hands. Not seeming to care much about her brother's worries, she continued to ask, "Isn't that a good thing for us?" He could not believe what he had heard and asked, "A good thing? Sister, are you crazy?" "What?" "No, I mean..." Edith sighed and explained, "Do you remember what we planned to achieve by serving the king here?" Cole replied with great care, "To achieve greater power." She looked at him with shining eyes and said, "Not exactly, but at least you're not completely wrong. Greater power comes from a bigger domain and a larger population. If the ancient witches, some alien species, and even the demons all rushed to the king's side, the power of this kingdom will extend from the human world to some alien lands. Do you understand?" He gasped at what she had said. She continued and said, "A lesser noble who owns a village can easily remember the names of all his subjects, but a lord of a city can never do that. The diversity of the people in a domain indicates just how vast the domain is, and no king has ever ruled over any alien species. This is a new opportunity for our family. We left the remote and backward domain for this, so why are you worried about it?" Hearing this, Cole stood in place for quite a long while before he opened his mouth and said, "But," Edith interrupted, "but they're not our kind. That's what you want to say, right?" She twitched her mouth and continued, "As long as His Majesty is still at the helm, he'll be able to do whatever he wants with those alien creatures." Her words seemed to turn the warm room icy cold. Edith said, "Now, it's time for you to pay me back for giving you that information." With her eyes squinted, the Pearl of the Northern Region pointed at the long dress and said with an affected drawl, "Put it on and let me have a look."